Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy. And thank you so much for joining me for it. So Jay and Dennis over at Podcast Stardust are doing a wonderful series once again. They've done this in the past with other Star Wars movies, but this year, because it's the anniversary of Return of the Jedi, they are doing episodes throughout the year where they dig into specific subsections of Return of the Jedi. They invited me on the show to talk about one of my absolute all-time favorite scenes in Star Wars storytelling, which is the escape from Jabba's sail barge. And also, just because it works out for their timing, the events that lead up to it, specifically starting with the moment that Luke walks into Jabba's palace and then ending as our heroes make good their escape. Now, my show's coming out just a little bit early ahead of theirs. So the audio version of this show debuts at 3:30 a.m. Eastern for Star Wars 7x7. Their episode is coming out at 9 a.m. Eastern today. So you're getting an early preview of the show thanks to Jay and Dennis sharing the audio with me. In addition to talking about a specific time within Return of the Jedi, they also ask all of their guests who've come on for this series a couple of questions about their Return of the Jedi experience, and that's what I'm sharing with you in this clip, this excerpt from the show. A couple of the questions that they ask everyone, one of them having to do with the first experience of Return of the Jedi, and one of them being what's your favorite scene in Return of the Jedi. And I think I've already kind of made it obvious what my answer is going to be, but that's what I'm sharing with you on today's episode, and I hope you will go check out Podcast Stardust for the full conversation where I am going to get ridiculously deep into the planning of this ridiculous escape and freeing of Han from Jabba's clutches. I mean, like, seriously nutty deep. So yeah, check that out at Podcast Stardust. They're on all your favorite podcatcher apps. But for now, this is an excerpt of the conversation that I got to have with Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust.
Well, we are thrilled to have you back, and I specifically wanted you for this episode because in the past, I remember on Star Wars 7x7, you had done a couple episodes about whether Luke really had a plan or not. When he was invading Jabba's palace in order to retrieve Han and his friends. So we'll get into that over the course of our discussion on this segment. But we start all of them by asking our guests a couple questions about their experience with Return of the Jedi. So Jay, would you go ahead and please kick that off?
Oh, I'd be very honored. Here we go. So Alan, what do you remember of your first ever viewing of Return of the Jedi? Take us back in time to that day.
Yeah. This is actually the first Star Wars movie I can remember seeing in the theater. I've heard from my mom that she took me to A New Hope and to Empire, but this is the first one I remember. And my mother took me out of school on the Friday, like the second day it was out, because I think it came out on a Thursday, if I remember right. And so I got to play hooky and go to a movie theater in the San Fernando Valley where it was weird. They had like 10 theaters, but they were across the street from each other, like 6 on one side and 4 on the other. And I didn't know which one had Return of the Jedi. And so it was like, oh, we got to be there and we got to be in the right building for it. And it was all this complication. And there was almost nobody in the theater. It was the strangest thing.
Wow.
Like, it was just a normal sized movie theater and hardly anyone in there. And we ended up staying and watching it twice over. And it was mind blowing. It was just mind blowing. And I felt so like amazed and happy to be in there. And just, yeah, it's still like, I'm sitting here talking with you and I'm looking at the hair on my arms and it's starting to go up. Like, it's still, brings that feeling to me as I think about it all these years later.
Wow, that's fantastic. So you're saying that you absorbed A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back by osmosis?
I guess so. I mean, at some point I do remember a first viewing, but the first viewing was not in theaters as I remember it. It was on TV.
No, I love those core memories though. And I love that it makes the hair on your arm stand up. That's fabulous.
Thanks.
All right. So question number 2 is, what is your favorite scene from Return of the Jedi?
Oh, we are actually going to cover it tonight.
Oh, excellent.
I get like deeply emotional the moment that, and I'm feeling it right now. Like the moment that R2 launches the lightsaber and John Williams' music kicks in, and you realize, oh my gosh, like, this is exactly... I mean, Luke has that line where he tells Han, just stick close to Chewie and Lando, I've taken care of everything. And as a kid, like, I've been trying to go back to that kid memory. Like, that must have gone entirely over my head at the time. But, like, when that lightsaber launches and Williams' music kicks in, and it's just the fanfare, and oh my gosh, he has a new lightsaber, and this seems like this is the plan. Like, it's just, I well up in tears. Like, it still happens like 40 years later. I can't understand why, but I do. It's just a complete Pavlovian response now. I will start crying with tears of joy the moment that scene comes on.
Well, there's really something about this particular sequence that for me just strikes that chord of those core memories as well, and takes me right back to remembering sitting in the theater, seeing specifically this part of the movie. So it's crazy that you say that, because I can totally relate to that too. Absolutely.
And there you go. That's a brief bit of my conversation with Jay and Dennis from Podcast Stardust. And there's so much more at Podcast Stardust that's coming out just in a few short hours from when this episode of Star Wars 7x7 is going live. Check out Podcast Stardust today, Wednesday the 29th at 9 a.m. Eastern on all your favorite podcatcher apps, and you'll get to hear the whole conversation about Return of the Jedi and the crazy plan that Luke has for getting Han away from Jabba the Hutt. And that's going to do it for this episode of the podcast of Star Wars 7x7. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
Star Wars 7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.